Good morning, everyone. My name is William Berg. I'm president of the Board of Directors of Preservation Sacramento. Welcome to the November 2021 Preservation Roundtable. We're going to give people just a couple minutes to join the meeting, and then we will begin our agenda. So thank you for your patience. All right. Well, it's just now 10 o'clock. We have about a dozen people joined the presentation. So I guess I will go ahead and just begin some formal introductions and letting people know what's happening today. The Preservation Roundtable is a quarterly meeting. It's Preservation Sacramento's quarterly public meeting and also a public forum for basically any organization or group that is discussing historic properties or things that are going on in a historic district or affecting historic places. So we offer a public forum to community groups, to neighborhood associations, to developers and builders, to city staff and government organizations and other nonprofits to essentially create a public forum. And that's why it was started back in, I think, 2003 is when the first preservation roundtables happened in the early 2000s. This is before I joined the organization, so I wasn't around for those. But it was envisioned originally as a roundtable, and then later on, when we reformed from Sacramento Old City Association to Preservation Sacramento, rather than the roundtable being an intergroup organization, we formally established that this is our member meeting, but we wanted to keep the public forum aspect of it. And then when we everybody went to doing things virtually 2 years ago, we did the same. And so people know probably the February roundtable will also be virtual. And then we are aiming for having an in-person roundtable for May of 2022, and we're still planning out exactly what's going to happen. We may try to do a series of Jane Jacobs walks, which also we weren't able to do in the last 2 years, but those would be outdoor events, obviously, and then see where it goes from there. So appreciate everybody's patience and persistence and participation, and thank you to anyone who's tuning in who attended our first virtual historic home tour last weekend. We're going to have a video from that at the end of an upcoming virtual tour. So just to go over very briefly, our agenda for today includes the Growers District, which is a project proposed for several buildings in the North 16th Street Historic District, and then I'm going to give a very brief update on what's happening with the Richmond Grove survey that Preservation Sacramento is funding and is almost complete. Uh, John Marshak is going to give us an update about what's happening with Boulevard Park Neighborhood Association, and then Karen Jock is going to talk about the Capitol Annex, and then we'll show the video. So first, I would like to introduce Rachel Royer. And I think Claire, you have your screen up, but we're gonna turn it over to Rachel first, so she can give some introductory comments.
And thanks for having us
Okay.
today. Yeah, I'll just do a really quick hello and then turn it over to the printers here. I'm Rachel Royer I'm the Director of Development at Capital. we are based in the Bay in Sacramento, and we're in construction street. Both are former department stores that were previously converted to office that we are doing a seismic retrofit on and modernizing systems and just getting the buildings on the horizon is Growers District. And I think most of you have already seen some information about it, but it's 3 separate sites along North 16th Street. Very interesting history, industrial history in the area. And we have our Page and Turnbull consultant, Claire Flynn, is going to get a little background on the history of the area. And then our architect, Mark Rowan,
Okay.
bit of information.
Rachel, I'm sorry, your audio is cutting out really
We're still
badly.
in early stages.
I'm wondering maybe if you shut off your video, we might be able to hear your audio.
That? Okay, I will just turn it over to Claire.
Okay. Claire,
well,
with that,
I'll turn it over to Claire, and she can do the presentation.
I also wanted to ask Rachel. Okay, well, Claire, what is the name of the organization that's doing this project? And she mentioned another building that they're working on in Sacramento, but we couldn't hear what it was. So, do you know what those are?
Rachel, did you get that?
Can you hear me any better?
Yes.
Can you hear me any better now?
Yes.
Yes. So my organization is Bound Capital, and we just finished 1130 K Street, and we are currently in construction at. We're in construction at 1130 K Street, and we just finished 830 K Street. Both former department stores, historic buildings that were previously converted to office. So we're upgrading and modernizing both of those buildings.
Okay, so that's the Weinstock and Lubin department store and the Montgomery Ward's department store?
Yep, that's right.
Terrific, thank you. Okay, so
sure.
I guess we can turn it over.
Sorry about the bad audio before.
All right, thank you.
We've all been there. All right, so I will kick off our presentation here. Can you see the screen? This should be a picture of me and Mark Gruen. We're going to be presenting today. So as Rachel mentioned, my name is Claire Flynn, and I am a cultural resources planner with Page and Turnbull, and we've been brought on to help provide some historic research for this project here on North 16th Street. And as Rachel mentioned, all 3 of the properties are in the North 16th Street Historic District, which is one of Sacramento's local historic districts. And all 3 of these properties are contributors to that district. Historically, the North 16th Street area was a busy industrial automotive corridor, and it's at the north side of the original Sacramento city grid, which you can see in the map there on the right. But this area didn't actually really begin to develop until the early 1900s, and it was considered a no man's land up until that period because there was so little development here up until the 1900s. And there are several different reasons for that. The first one is that it was a floodplain. So because of its location where the American River and the Sacramento River come together, it used to flood very, very frequently. And in the early 1900s, a series of reclamation efforts took place that allowed this area to start to develop more. Another reason that this area was pretty isolated is that as part of the city's flood defenses, a levee was constructed along B Street that had railroad tracks along the top of it. And while that helped protect the city from flooding, it also effectively cut the North 16th Street area off from the rest of the city. And then thirdly, this area was right next to the Southern Pacific Railroad workshops, which produced a lot of noise and pollution and just generally made it kind of an unpleasant place to, build houses and things like that. You didn't want to live next to the Southern Pacific Railroads. So all this really begins to change in the 1920s, primarily because access to the area improves. So you have things like the 16th Street Bridge being constructed across the American River. The Lincoln Highway, which is one of the country's first transcontinental highways, is routed down 16th Street. And then an improved levee crossing was completed under that B Street levee. And all of this really opens the area up to development. And as a result, it becomes a busy automotive corridor. So you have things like car camps and auto body shops and gas stations being constructed. In addition, the Southern Pacific Railroad started to extend some spur tracks into the area, which attracted industrial development, because if you have, efficient and easy access to the railroads, that allows you to transport your goods all across the country. And then thirdly, this area starts to develop into a center for the agricultural industry, specifically because of the Sacramento Produce Terminal, which we're going to talk about a lot more in a little bit. So I'm going to go kind of roughly chronologically for how these three properties were developed. So the first one is this building at 211, 217 North 16th Street, which we all probably know best as the Ruland's used office furniture store. And I have it outlined there in the yellow dotted line, so you can see exactly what we're looking at there. And this building actually has a really interesting and kind of complex history. It contains a portion of a much older building that was built in 1922, which was the A. Meister and Sons Company headquarters. And this is actually one of the first buildings that was constructed in the North 16th Street area. And there's a really interesting and obvious reason for that, which is that A. Meister and Sons Company was owned by Edward and Albert Meister, who by the 1920s had purchased much of the North 16th Street area and began to develop it. So of course, when they first decided to start developing it, what did they do? The first thing they built was build a new headquarters for their family business, which was A. Meister and Sons. The company had been founded in the 1860s by their father, August, and at that time had specialized in manufacturing wagons and wagon wheels and carriages. But by the 1920s, the company had shifted to producing cars, buses, trains, or trucks, rail cars, all sorts of things like that. And they produced those out of this building here. And I have some photos of that early building here. You can see in the aerial in the middle from 1928. And then two photos on the upper right also show this earlier A. Meister and Sons Company building. Now, unfortunately, that business went out of business in 1924, and in 1932, it was sold, and almost all of that first building was demolished, except for maybe the north third-ish, we think. And it was replaced with a new building that contained an auto service shop, a garage, and a restaurant. And that's basically the building that exists today. And the building suffered a few different fires in its history. So there was one in 1943, which you can see in the photo on the bottom right. And we found this to be a really useful photo in our research because it's the only one that I've been able to locate so far that shows what the front facade looked like prior to a second fire that occurred in 1966, which is part of the reason that the facade looks the way it does today. And then, as I mentioned, since the 80s, this building has been occupied and owned by Ruland's used office furniture. So the second building I'm going to talk about is the Sacramento Produce Terminal at 200 North 16th Street, which is an incredibly fascinating building. And I've had so much fun learning all about its history and the many layers of stories that have gone into it. And I kind of think of it as this hidden gem in Sacramento that we all drive by every day. But anyway, it's this very, very large U-shaped building that occupies basically a whole city block along North 16th Street. And it has a curved corner on its northwest side, which is where a rail spur used to be. So the Sacramento Produce Terminal was originally built in 1925 by the Sacramento Produce Terminal Company, which was, you guessed it, it was led by Edward and Albert Meister, who were the two gentlemen who owned the previous property I just mentioned. And this is really their most important contribution, I think, to Sacramento. Why is that? Well, because the Sacramento Produce Terminal was and remains today one of the only produce terminal markets in California, or at least as far as I've been able to discover so far through my research. I tried to identify others, and I think there are two that are pretty intact down in LA, but I was kind of hard pressed to find any others. And I think these types of buildings, they were mainly built in large metropolitan areas that had easy access to various means of transportation. So that makes sense for why one would be built here in Sacramento, because we had access to trains, highways, and rivers in our major metropolitan area. Basically, a produce terminal market building is a combination of a marketplace and a train station that is specifically designed for transporting produce. So they're a really interesting and specific property type. And this is the place where basically every morning farmers would arrive. They would bring produce that they had grown on their farms, and they would sell them to retailers and wholesalers that were lined up on the platform that you can see on the photo on the upper right-hand side, that platform that goes down the middle of the courtyard. And then that produce would be loaded onto trucks that were lining the loading docks kind of all around that inner courtyard, or onto rail cars that were waiting on the spur tracks that were around the back of the building. So you have immediate access to transportation, which was absolutely essential to the function and importance of this building because, you know, as we all know, produce spoils very quickly. So if the sooner you can get it from the fields onto someone's table, the better. And this building was extremely important to Sacramento's development because prior to its construction, Sacramento's entire produce market system consisted of sort of ad hoc sales that took place from wagons and carts and individual stands that were clustered together and kind of built up every morning on some streets downtown. I think it was concentrated on I Street between 3rd and 5th. And, you know, it wasn't really centralized. There wasn't a whole lot of order. And of course, sanitation was probably an issue. So when this building was constructed, it really modernized Sacramento's entire produce industry and replaced that old system by centralizing Sacramento's entire produce market and industry in one modern building with modern conveniences, modern sanitation, and of course, direct access to transportation. So this building, when it was completed, had an immediate impact on Sacramento. First, it attracted other agricultural industrial businesses to the North 16th Street area. One example is the W.A. Ward Seed Company building that was built immediately to the north of the Ruins building. And secondly, it is credited as one of the reasons that Sacramento became the center for the region's produce industry, because, you know, this is the place that all the farmland or the produce from the surrounding farmland was brought every day, bought, sold, and then redistributed to markets across the state and the surrounding region. So I really love that newspaper picture at the top, because that really encapsulates Sacramento becoming the fruit and produce hub for the Rich Valley. And I like to think of this building as the place that Sacramento's identity as the farm to fork capital really started. It goes back a long ways. And then another thing that I really enjoyed about researching this property is that it just has so many different layers. So when you look at the city directories to try to identify who the tenants were, who the businesses were that operated out of here every day, a pattern you notice is that so many of the businesses were owned by immigrant families or first-generation American families from all sorts of different backgrounds. And many of them were there for decades at a time. So there were Chinese, Japanese, Italian, German, Jewish families that all worked out of this building. And one of them was the General Produce Company, which was founded by a Chinese immigrant named Chan Tai-oi in 1933 in the midst of the Great Depression. And you can see him and his family on the upper left-hand side there. Chan Tai-oi, the founder, is in the middle there with the bald head. And after he passed away, it was passed to his 3 sons and his nephew, who are in the back row of that photo. And the company survives today, you know, 70 something years later, still operating out of the same building. And it's in the 3rd generation of Chan's. So I just think it's really, really an interesting part of this whole building story is also the story of all these different families and businesses and cultures and things that operate out of here. The last kind of layer of this building that I find really fascinating is that, you know, whether you believe it or not, it was actually built by one of Sacramento's most prominent architectural firms. And I think that's a testament to how important this building was to Sacramento. It was designed by Dean and Dean, again in 1925. And they've constructed so many of the city's landmarks, including the Memorial Auditorium, the Westminster Presbyterian Church across from Capitol Park, all of the old schools that you see around the city. So I have a picture of the Fremont School, which is now Clara. They also did Sierra 2 and, you know, a bunch of the others. They did the Sutter Club. And so when we were researching, we were really thrilled to find that the Center for Sacramento History has the original Dean and Dean drawings for the Sacramento Produce Terminal. And I've just included a small snippet here just so you can see that. Really, really fascinating to see. And then the third property that's part of the Growers District is this group of buildings on North C Street. Again, I'm going to go kind of roughly through them chronologically. So while right now this is one single property, there are actually, originally this was 3 separate properties with 3 separate businesses on it. The oldest one was built at 1610 North C Street. It was built in 1923 for the L.R. Murphy Scale Company, which was a company that produced industrial scales. So they could handle weights of a few thousand to hundreds of thousands of pounds. You know, they could weigh cattle, rail cars, flour, you know, all sorts of extremely heavy weights. And that business expanded throughout up until around the 1960s or so. And then the other 2 businesses or buildings on this property were built around the same time, around 1940. The first one I'll talk about is 1612 North C Street, and that one was built as a warehouse for Best Foods Incorporated, which is probably best known as the company that produces Best Foods Blue Ribbon mayonnaise. It's gone through a lot of different mergers and things over time, and it still survives today. But anyway, this specific building was a warehouse for that company. And then the third building here, 1616 North C Street, was originally built as a factory for Top Hat Potato Chip Company. And they produced fresh potato chips out of this building every day through 1959 or so, which sounds pretty pleasant to me. And then actually, so the first company here, the L.R. Murphy Scale Company, I said they continued to expand their business. In the 1950s and 1960s, they actually bought up the other 2 buildings here and expanded their scale manufacturing operations into them. And then they also built a number of large warehouses around the backside. So I'm going to show you this slide here. This kind of shows the complicated development of this lot here, but it was the L.R. Murphy Scale Company expanding into the adjacent properties and buildings that which is what brought this property to its current form and size. So that, I think, is all of the history I have for you right now, but I'll stick around for questions at the end. And I think it's Mark Gruen's turn next.
Hey, thanks, Claire.
Let me, before we switch over to Mark, it sounds like there are a couple questions that came up, if you don't mind, Claire. This is about the history of the site, so that's your department, it's the historian. Let's see. One question is, one vintage sign appears to be reintegrated in the project. Will Rulins be, okay, actually this may be more of an architecture question, but do you know if the cow is going to remain as part of the project?
I do love the cow. I recently saw a post that the cow is being relocated. I think he's going somewhere at Elk Grove. I was just telling Rachel and Mark that the other day. I read Sac Mod had posted that he's going to a place in Elk Grove, so he's being put out to pasture.
Okay. Thank you. And then, do you know whom the Meisters purchased the land from?
I think it was several different families. I'd have to go back and look again, but it wasn't any one individual, if I remember correctly.
Okay, there's a question whether Southern Pacific might have been the landowner, but it sounds like
I don't believe, at least not, they started purchasing this land around 1917 and then kind of gradually acquired more through the 20s. And from what I remember, it didn't seem that it was mostly Southern Pacific Road by that point. I think it was other individual people.
Okay. I think the only story I've heard, that there's a story about a riverboat that got stuck on a cabbage in a farm there. It was during a flood, but that's
sure.
There were a lot of farms there. And then the other question was regarding the Chan family. Do you know what the patriarch of the Chan family, was he an immigrant or was he born in the U.S., or do you happen to know?
I understand that he was an immigrant. I believe that from what I read, he did come over from China, and I think he might have been in San Francisco first and then came here. And worked at a different wholesale produce company before founding General Produce Company here at the Sacramento Produce Terminal.
Okay, and then there's the question from Alan LaFaso about what's a spur track, and that's basically just it's a piece of track that comes off of the main line from a railroad to an industry, and
sure.
so that's just how you get boxcars and things from that industry back onto the track. So it's like a driveway for trains.
I see Robin Slakey's got a bunch of answers here for us about the history of this.
Okay. And okay, well, Robin Slakey, if you don't mind, you could just type the answer into the chat and then I could read it live later, but I'll go ahead and hand it over to Mark. Mark Gruen.
Ruin.
And he's the architect, and he can tell us more about what's planned for the district.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me, everyone, I hope. My name's Mark Gruen, and I'm with Verlakis Gruen Architects here in Midtown, Sacramento. I've been with Ron Verlakis for about 15 years, doing work that we love to do in the city of Sacramento, in Midtown and around, including this site, which is so exciting. What a project, what an opportunity, and it has such great history. So Claire, that was great to get a little more from your end. And we're excited. It's a large project, and we all know the area, and it's amazing that nothing like this has really happened. But working with the Bone Capital Group, they came into us seeking, hey, we want catalyst change in this area. This is a huge opportunity to, in an area that's somewhat neglected. I kind of call it the pass-through area. So many of us experience, I think, Claire, like you said, driving hopefully less than 55 miles an hour on North 16th Street as you pass or leave the area, and you hardly notice these great historical brick buildings, industrial buildings, and the critical role it played in Sacramento's past. And so our hope as architects is to both maintain and preserve that history in these buildings, but also provide new life and new opportunity through modern, whether it be additions or infill, that doesn't seek to recreate historic buildings, but seeks to provide a building of its time, a contemporary building, hopefully that lasts and complements the building. So hopefully this neighborhood goes from pass-through to an actual neighborhood where people want to be and live. And so you saw we're all familiar, I think, Pipeworks here. Here's the main growers site, and then 215 and the Roulons building that Claire was talking about. We're in the River District Design Review. There's some of the things that are coming in the area, the Marisol project that's recently being built here, the fire station that is being built here at Ahern. So things are happening, and the bones are so good to see it happen at this time. I've highlighted the yellow because the next slide will be one where we're showing you how we're approaching the infill. I said catalyst, and a critical mass is something that we're being charged to provide. And so you couldn't come in here and place 10 apartments or 15 apartments or even 100 to expect a notable change. And so the client is asked us, and we're looking at really creating a catalyst for change of that critical mass being plus 500 apartments. And that makes this, starts to make this place immediately thrive with people living and coming and going and working in the city, and starts to affect these neighborhood properties that might need change as well. So this next site shows you how we look to accomplish that. We're looking at basically maintaining on the grower side here, maintaining all of the historic building and the raised loading dock areas and covered areas around the perimeter and on the interior perimeter. And then on the Roulons building, we're looking to maintain most of the perimeter brick, that slightly newer portion that was damaged, I think back to the 60s. You can see we'll see is something that we're looking to change out to something more contemporary, but keeping the main perimeter of the three sides, the west, north, and east of the brick and the terracotta tile. So now we'll see how this starts to impact. And everything in blue that you see here is existing and meant to be retained, is meant to be preserved and restored and rehabbed to new uses. And then everything in yellow is meant to be the living units and the apartments that seek to bring a neighborhood here. We talk about connectivity to some of and I'll show you slides as we get closer, but connectivity to some of the other buildings that are in the perimeter, and how these buildings start to impact that. So I'll go through a number of views from the street, and then how this project might, these are schematic drawings, schematic views of how this project impacts that, that visual. We'll start looking up North 16th Street. Again, it's 4+ lanes of traffic. I know the bike plan and the River District Design Review Guidelines, street restoration has new sidewalks, bike lanes and whatnot scheduled to be a part of that. And that would all be incorporated on these 3 blocks that we will be looking to do. But here you have the notable tower from the Growers District. You have Roulons from the south, and then Pipeworks to the left here. And as you come up that street, we're sort of envisioning it as coming alive with a lot more energy and people living here. So here's Pipeworks to the left, the existing brick buildings from the growers' produce market that would be rehabbed and renovated for new uses. This newer tower building that you saw from the air before is notable. It's bringing people in to live in this area and shop in this area, or hopefully spurring that change, and then provides views back to the city and over to the river as well. You can see that we're stepping it back from the 16th Street, the main lobby of that building, and would be a 2-story plus volume of new brick and glass that would be the lobby and allow you to exit right out onto 16th Street or back into what they're looking to do is create that sort of interior perimeter of being rehabbed market spaces, offices, and shopping spaces. So we'll take a look at that here in the upcoming slides as well. To the right is Roulons, and you can see the historic portion kind of here peeking out, and we'll see more of that from the north side. And then the housing here too is stepped back about 13 to 15 feet, a new brick infill in this corner to provide retail and or office as needed. And you can see the 215 building is another 5-story over podium apartment housing project, step back from the street. This is just another backup view again of where we're looking. And one of the things to note on these 2 towers, particularly on the 200 building, is, it's got the raised loading docks on the south side with the roll-up doors for the trucks to approach. And that's kind of consistent all the way around. Here's that rail spur. We'll see an image of that later, of how that rounded corner brick building on the north is handled. And so this next view will kind of show us kind of at this ground level corner with this existing beautiful tower. And you can see here's the raised loading dock that's existing. There's a couple of the openings you can start to see in the brick as you're going down. And if we take another look as kind of how we're seeing how that might be envisioned and used, there would be keeping that maintaining that raised loading dock, maintaining all the brick buildings, looking at replacing some of those roll-up doors and openings for with storefront and or access to uses within, maybe adding some more to, if this is a restaurant, bringing more in there, making everything accessible, bike friendly, new sidewalks and planters as you see here. And you can see here where that entry to the main building is set back as well from the street, giving prominence to these 2 brick towers here. Keep on going. Here's a north view of the site, and here's where that spur would come off of, and I'm not exactly sure where the rail track, it must have been over here, and then would come around and allow for tracks and trucks to come up to this area. But here too, you see this northern wing is twice the width as the southern wing, and so there's opportunity to access this side of the building from C Street, and then from the raised loading dock on the inside, access that building and have sort of this central core that could feed Chelsea. An image we've looked at is Chelsea Market in New York, where you're having rehab of an exterior or in the interiors that allow for varied shops and people to walk in and out, both from the C Street side, both from the loading dock side on the interior. So we'll see maybe a view, this one. This is actually a plan, a little closer view of the site plan. So here's that horseshoe. The red is all the existing. The new is what's being proposed. Here too, with the blue on this 5 stories over podium would be proposed to sit within the existing building. So to leave and set back from the existing brick 2-story mass around the perimeter. But then the tower, we'll call it, would sit within and allow, we're looking at this, again, that connectivity, allow the lobby and access to the shops below to be able to pass right on through from the loading dock to North C Street here. All the parking is shown, that's shown on the perimeter is meant to be per the River District design guidelines. We're working with the city to make that to get those all right. There's some discrepancy between different plans, but this is meant to get it the way the River District is looking to have their perimeter sidewalks and trees and parking stalls. Interesting note on that spur, we've talked about it here of that sort of corner becoming sort of a interpretation plaza, historic of the history of the site, maybe with kiosks, landscapes, and sitting areas, sort of a nice frontage to this curved brick building that would house new uses, offices or stores or retail. And then so the other interesting thing I thought that was notable was there's that existing, let's see, sorry here, that existing little kiosk that, as you recall from the original site, this little tower building, the brick that has been there, probably there was a gas station, I think, originally there, or some sort of fueling station. And so that brick tower, the city has asked if we could see how that might be maintained. And so here too, we are, let me jump back, sorry. We are looking to see in the lobby, in the 2- or 3-story lobby space where the elevators would be for this building, we would be looking to incorporate that as a piece of the history that was at the central entry of this building. Parking would be proposed to be ringing the interior, fronting the loading docks as well. So here's a view from the north on C Street looking towards 16th. This is the Growers District building, or that the building that we're currently looking at. You can see even some of these warehouses were infilled, or these roll-up door areas were infilled. We're looking to bring those back. And so a possibility might be something like this, raising up another loading dock kind of walkway. Really, it's more of pedestrian circulation that would be accessible, providing some storefront and areas for access into this side of the building, perhaps looking at painting the brick, or cleaning the brick, or painting it a different color to pop on this raised section here. All of the brick would seek to be restored per the Secretary of Interior standards that we would be going off of. But this is an interesting site too. A shot, you're seeing 215, which is the site to the north, and you're seeing the peaking up of the Roulons building apartments behind, and sort of maintaining. The interesting point too, the brick is all meant to, the ground floor scale is all meant to be maintained and kind of replicate this play of heights of different materials as you walk along 16th. And I think that's apparent as you look at the Roulons and the Growers building as well. Here we're just kind of turning the corner, looking south on 16th. There's the cow from Roulons that it'd be great to have it stay. Maybe that could be bought back or brought back in some way. The Roulon sign is probably, we're looking to refurbish that in some way as well on this building. And then over here is looking back at the existing brick and what that possibly could look like as you're looking back at it. Again, really seeking to open it up and allow people who live here or who drive by want to stop here and see what's happening here and become acquainted with it. So it's a fair amount of housing, but it does seek to change dramatically what's there as far as livability now. Here's just a couple of street elevations, Pipeworks to the left, the existing growers market, produce market, and you can see we're trying to maintain that line of brick to those 2-3-story heights with the new modern interpretation of that and the 2 access ways that allow you to go down. This is just the flip side, Rulon's building to the north and that 250, or to the south, 215 to the north. Just another focusing on that market and what could be on these raised loading docks areas. You can kind of see rehabbing that, opening it all up, allowing housing to exist within but set back, bringing people to the site, getting a little closer, allowing what, you know, that could really, someone had talked about having a market or a grocery of some sort there that might work. A little closer view of that raised loading dock, parking and access up to it. And this would be sort of a plan of that area. We were just looking, here's 16th Street, looking toward this interior shot. And this was the wider portion that we talked about earlier, allowing public through and around that ground floor, going to C Street and possibly newer buildings along, rehab buildings along the way that we'd be anticipating. But then the lobby and lounge could be something that tenants only would have access to, but also public would have access to at certain times of the day. And so interior shots, I just grabbed a shot of, you know, Chelsea Market or something, but that would be the goal, to see that happen kind of through here and maybe around the entire building. So almost done. The Rulon site is the next one. And here too, we're looking to this, the rest of this is a series of tin roof buildings, not necessarily brick or the value that we're seeing and looking to maintain is the brick and areas along this way with the tile. There's the brick wall with the sort of the warehouse style steel sash windows that run around these 2 sides as well. So there it is, kind of, we're looking at 100+ units there. There'd be a podium. It'd be set back from the blue, which is the historic portion on both sides. Here's a view of it from the street. And I think this block, this line here is meant to show you, this was newer, I think in the 60s edition. So the goal would be to restore and maintain these facades that wrap around. Great windows, great brick detail. And this has taken some battering over the years. So it'd be looked to restore that to what it was. And you can see it's old, but here's a shot of kind of from across the street. Here's that same brick facade. This would make a great lounge for the tenants. And we're looking at a lobby entry off the side street here, a parking garage entry off the side in the back here. The Rulon sign could be incorporated in some way. A modern, newer brick corner that would be seen as you come up on 16th. And then the apartment setback. And the materials, I think that's the next slide, looking to maintain industrial materials. We've done work in Sacramento, both on our street here, both with the historic building and sort of merging of newer brick and detailing. Done some work in Oak Park on recreating kind of row house style. So the materials you've seen on ice blocks, the metal siding, smooth plaster, and brick in a new way. The cannery, which is over by Township 9, is something we worked on as well. That kind of gives some feel. And then I think lastly, important to the sort of green spaces, we were looking to maintain both something along the west side here of the property of the Site 200. And also this was shown before as that interpretive historic center, maybe incorporating the green spaces along there as well. But all of it looking to bring in trees and sidewalks that per city standards. Back to this one. Some of the scale you might see out there. Here's our L Street project that looks to bring in brick and smooth plaster as well. I believe that's kind of the overview. It's a lot. There's it's schematic, but there's a desire for seeing this really change in energy and become a neighborhood where people live and work and shop and grow, which no pun intended for the growers district, but I think that's a good place to be, and we're excited about being a part of it. I'll leave this slide up if interested and willing to take questions. Rachel, I know, will and Claire can help me field questions that come in. There's probably a lot.
Yeah, it looks like we have a few questions in the Q&A and the chat, and then if any of the attendees want to ask a question live, just raise your hand, and when we get through the questions, I will call on you to speak. Let's see, it looks like in the Q&A section, there's a question about whether or not some of those commercial spaces could also be live-work spaces, similar to the walk-ups on the east and west side of the 1801 L lofts. Would they be built to residential standards for conversion to live-work?
Yes, in fact, Rachel might share a little bit more too. We've discussed the style of these as being live-work lofts and not meant to be at a high rentable price point, but meant to be available to many. And in particular, were you talking about some of them along, was the question talking about some of them along the street frontage here?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I think there's opportunity for that. And it's zoned for that. And we would look to entertain those sort of tenants in those areas as well. That's a great use.
Okay. And then you mentioned affordability. Do you know if there's an expectation or a plan for any of these to be affordable units or all market rate or a combination thereof?
Rachel might speak to that better. I believe they're all market rate, but meant to be at the lower price point. So the majority of units are studios and one bedrooms, with some 2 and possibly 3, but majority are studios would be to be at, and the team is looking at rates that are on the lower end of market rate. Rachel, is there anything more you want to add to that?
No, that's right, Mark. We're not pursuing any kind of affordable tax credits, but we are hoping to keep the price points low through the design of the units and the unit mix.
Okay. Let's see. I'm just marking answers here, but also had a question about parking ratio, about how much parking is being provided.
Right. So we're looking to park it within the city standards. We are, certain projects are within the 0.25 miles. I think the grower side is within 0.25 miles of the light rail, and the others are 0.5 miles. So that allows you some reduction in parking. It's not meant to park everything one-to-one. In fact, it's meant to encourage more walkability, more public transit to downtown if you're working there. So I have the ratios. Let's see, I can jump back here a second, or I have the totals, I think. So on this larger North 200 site here, we're providing 245 parking stalls, and that includes public parking around the perimeter here. For the buildings, we're providing 45 below grade, and then perimeter parking as well. And then here, site 211, 56 stalls below. So well below, it's not one-to-one for sure, and it's not meant to be. I think we're trying to hit those minimums that the city allows, with the reduction being close to transit orient.
Okay. Actually, that's a question. Okay, it's close to transit. I mean, it's close to light rail, but light rail doesn't stop.
Right.
So does that apply? Does it? Yeah. Does that? You don't need to be near the transit, even if you can't get on. So that maybe is the question for you.
That's a great question, actually. I know, the future light rail station is planned to go up on by the river here. Now, and that was just something that the city got back to us and said this would be within. So I'd have to look at that to see. It seemed like it should be near a stop, I would assume, but maybe it's the bus transportation or public transit that allows it to get to those stations. But
there's no buses that have there's no high frequency buses that would
Yeah.
qualify as TOD, and if it was, they'd run up 16th Street and the whole project would be near it.
Yeah.
It's I know that there's a plan to open a stop at North 12th Street, but it hasn't been opened
It's
yet.
not there.
And then the other question related to that, I think a couple of people posted about it, is potential effects on Loaves and Fishes and the other current uses just to the west of this site and adjacent. Do you see this having an effect on that, or how do you think that this project and the people who already live in this neighborhood and would interact?
Well, I think there's room for improvement in the existing area now, but also a balance of interaction and working with those neighbors, as you're saying. I'm just going to jump back up to the site to show where those could be. And Rachel, you might want to speak to that as well. I think the goal is to provide a positive interaction for positive growth and change for everyone. That would be my take on it.
Okay. And I wasn't sure if Rachel is still on or not. I know she's still on the call, but I think she said she had to leave, so I wasn't sure if she's still around. The other question is about there was a question about rooftops, rooftop spaces. Are there any plans for doing things on the top of these buildings?
There are. Notably on this taller one in the middle, there's looking to have sort of roof decks here at the corner, which again here too, fantastic views this way. Smaller roof decks situated throughout. Here we haven't necessarily got into that yet, but I think there's room for it. These currently would have, you can kind of see it here, this podium over the parking below would be an amenity for the tenants to have seating areas and landscape and whatnot, that kind of thing. So it is being considered for sure.
Okay. And there's someone has mentioned that the new station is being built right now off of North 12th Street. I've noticed that there's some construction activity on the site, but I hadn't seen the proximity of the station yet. But that's good to know.
Yeah.
It's one of those things very often. I mean, I guess the canonical local example is North Natomas, where projects are still being approved because of their proximity to a light rail line that was planned 30 years ago and still hasn't arrived. So at least the trains are running. It's a matter of getting them to stop. And it, like I said, it seems like just the public feedback we've seen. There's a few people who had questions about housing affordability, about the effect it'll have on Loaves and Fishes, and essentially the issue with transformation is what happens to the people who are already there. So at least hopefully it sounds like it's being taken into account and being considered.
Sure.
Let's see the next question I have. Okay, we have a couple of people who want to speak. I saw a hand go up. Okay, actually, it's Karen Jacques. Karen, go ahead and unmute yourself, and you can ask a question.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Yeah, I had a couple questions in relation to climate change, and one of those, because there's a great deal of cement and built materials, and how you're planning to address heat island effect, and also questions about permeability, because there's a great deal of surface coverage, and the predictions that we're getting are that we will alternate between increased heat, increased drought, significantly higher temperatures, and then when we get rain, that it may be the kind of thing that we got a little bit of a couple weeks ago, where we had 5-point-something inches in just a very short time. And so there are issues of how do people stay safe in terms of their body heat, and how will this deal when we get the torrential rainfalls that are predicted?
Right. Good questions. I know that we are looking to, have solar panels as part of this project. All the apartments, everything would be completely electric, no gas, no, none of the appliances would be gas or the water heating or anything. It's all electric to meet that. It's an interesting site. it's all asphalt right now. And I think the goal is to make sure whatever is put there meets on-site drainage storage capabilities, meets, isn't pushing, just distributing it all back to the storm drain system, but maybe there's percolation and there's permeable pavement type materials that allow for it to hold. I don't know about was that a 200-year storm we had last time? I don't know how that would necessarily, but I think that all gets considered as we get further into the design of these. Materials as well, we would look to ensure they're, try to make sure they're sustainable in the best ways we can with the developer. And I think just the fact that this is urban infill starts to, is in itself sort of the right way to approach these sites rather than building further away. Permeable, both from, you mentioned that word, I think from a walkability standpoint, ensuring that walkability around this neighborhood is critical. Bicycles and alternative modes of transportation is critical. So we do want that's all in our thinking as we move further into the design.
Yeah, all that stuff is absolutely critical. I've been following, as I do a lot of climate related stuff with 350 and just the issues of increasing heat and the heat island effect and the trees, green spaces, also plans. There are now apparently paints and other surfaces that reflect heat back. And so I'm just wondering about your plans for all of those, because it has the potential to become a real safety issue as temperatures rise, and all this stuff is happening faster than the predictions said it would. So
right, true.
Yeah, and I know we need to wrap up in a few minutes. We have a few more questions on the dock. One is, so you mentioned potential solar. So do we know whether or not there's going to be solar integrated into the building?
There will be a minimum requirement of solar that meets California's energy code, and we would provide that for sure. And then looking for opportunities for solar hot water and whatnot as well is something we would be investigating for sure.
And I know one other strategy that was used a few places, like on 16th Street in Midtown, were bioswales, where there's so is there a plan for any integration of bioswales into any of these?
I know that talking with our civil Cunningham engineering, they're the ones who are investigating all the on-site retention and whatnot. These sidewalks are so tight along here. They would be expanding into 6th Street a bit, and I think there might be opportunities for that kind of thing in some of these, just like you see lower 16th and N Street, some of these sort of block out areas are available. So that's a good point. I'm sure it'll be part of our discussion with them.
Yeah, and they had someone ask if 16th Street was going to remain one way, and I assume it is. But one other issue about 16th Street, and some people already mentioned the rate at which people travel on that street. How do people get across that street? And what is there any plan for essentially parking and access to control to make it a little more survivable experience?
Yeah, I think there has to be. We brought it up, and I don't know if it's been discussed to the level it should be. I think having these crossings at certain areas needs to occur in order just to slow people down. And so it's definitely, it makes the neighborhood a better place. I'm thinking you want to have crossings kind of around these areas just to be able to keep people walking around, and that alone would start to slow it. There's a light here, and I think there's one up a ways, but maybe another one goes here. It is something the city is aware of, and we are as well.
All right. And then I also had a question, what preservation incentives, if any, are being utilized? So Mills Act, federal historic rehab tax credit, state historic rehab tax credit, or other sorts of incentives?
Claire, are you familiar with what they're proposing? If Rachel's not on, she would know.
I think we have suggested it, but I don't believe that they're going after anything in particular right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's basically just following the city's codes, and that's
Yeah.
it's listed as a local. There was some question about that, and I saw Claire and I both answered at the same time that it's listed in the Sacramento Register, and local listing is really the strongest protection that a building can have from private property owner action. So they have to follow the Secretary of Interior standards,
Right.
and
The
But
North 16th Street design guidelines. And
yeah,
I know that, you guys are working directly with the city's preservation department on all of this. So, but I haven't heard that they're going after particular financial incentives or credits for this. But
yeah, and I'm not sure if you guys can hear me, but we
Yeah.
are not pursuing any historic tax credits. We're just doing, we want to protect and preserve these buildings. We may do Mills Act, but that's still just something we're considering at this point.
okay, thank you. That is one of the on the list of questions that I was to ask. And then it sounds like we talked a little bit about solar on the rooftops. Any possibility for greenery on the rooftops? I know that's another issue itself.
I would say definitely. To what extent, I'm not sure. We'll have panels all on the rooftops. One of the goals on some of these larger buildings is there are pretty deep overhangs along this side on the west, or at west and the south, and getting planters on those so that greenery could kind of follow itself down as it breaks up this mass is something that we're proposing as well.
All right, and then we need to finish up. But there was one more question. Is actually someone asked for more amplification about parking as far as the expectation of where people will park. And I personally, I'm not really a person with a lot of parking concerns myself, but I do have a friend who had a business here, and she recently closed and relocated in part because having events on her space on North 16th Street was very difficult. People
Yeah.
couldn't find places to park to attend. So what do you see as the expectation for parking here, rather than just the numbers, but how it works?
Well, I know for the tenants, each of these buildings has private parking for the tenants under the podiums here. This building has a parking below as well, although it's certainly not one-to-one, and it's not trying to be. I think for events and other types of things, it's a good question. This site is empty right now, and it's not part of this project, but there was talk at something, could it be leased for even overflow parking while it sits empty? So I think some of those sites start to become possibilities for perimeter parking. Let's see, there's one other shot here. There is meant to be full perimeter parking, as I think you saw. Let's look at this site here. Per the River District plan, street and perimeter parking, it's a little harder on North B because it's just doesn't have the street width. So there's a little bit of parking here. And then there's ringed parking throughout here that would be open to the public during the day and then suffice as tenant parking where open in the evenings. I don't know if that fully answers, fully answers it, but.
It's a tough question sometimes, and it's always it is a balancing act. And I know that these are just overall renderings. Were there any drawings or concepts done for the interiors of the apartments, or is that a later phase?
I don't have it in that pack, but there is, and that's coming. I don't think I have it available at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And one actually question that I had that was answered by the presentation is regarding the tower that in the middle there was. I saw the overall renderings. Oh no, are they going to destroy the tower? Or okay, it's going to be inside the building. So it's kind of a neat design solution. So it sounds
Great.
like we're interested to see more. And
Yeah.
thank you very much for taking the time.
Okay.
And we'll have you end your share screen.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
All right. And next on our agenda, I'm going to give a very brief update about a pending Preservation Sacramento project, which is our historic district survey in Richmond Grove. And Richmond Grove, while technically Richmond Grove is the name of a park, it was located between 19th and 20th and P and R Street. The area south of R Street, between the Southside Park neighborhood and the Poverty Ridge neighborhoods, the area outlined in red here, so roughly between 12th to 19th and S and W Street. This is the overall survey area that we've been looking at and had a consultant who hired this summer. And you'll notice that it actually extends all the way out to 10th Street. And one reason why we wanted to look at that is that it was an area that wasn't covered by the area in gold, which is the Southside Park Historic District, which extends all the way up T Street, the old streetcar line, to between 15th and 16th. And we wanted to look at that area for a few different reasons. In part, what our consultant has found so far is the first thing you tend to notice in Sacramento's historic districts is 19th century architecture. There's actually some there, even though for most of the 19th century, there wasn't a lot built in this neighborhood because, like we talked about with the Growers District in the area north of B Street, the area south of R Street until about 1902 was outside of levees, and so it was still subject to flooding until the turn of the century. And after that happened, a whole lot of buildings got built. The Henry F. Miller home on the left at 18th and U Street is being considered as an individual landmark. And then also a building at 19th and T Street is the Women's Civic Improvement Club, which is one that we recommended to the consultant that she look at closely as an individual landmark, as an African-American associated building. This was built by a German family in the 1890s who had a lot of kids. And so there were many bedrooms, and WCIC, as I mentioned, is an African American women's club, and they bought it for use as a boarding house because there were very, very few places that were safe that a single African American woman could rent. And so this became their first home. They later moved to another place that was wiped out by the freeway, and they are actually still around as a civic organization in Oak Park. We're also concentrating on a part of the neighborhood called Mission Treco, which is closer to the sort of the south eastern corner along W Street and V Street in the teens. And this was one of several developments, and we found a sale to the to Nising and Mission Trejo and a few other few other ownership transfers within that area. But it's one of the identifiable developments. And then a lot of the buildings are 20th century residential single-family homes like these, craftsman bungalows along 15th Street. But there's also other contexts. This is not strictly a residential district. It's a mixed-use neighborhood in the traditional sense, that there are just a mixture of uses. So there's an apartment building that many of you may recognize along North 16th Street. It's called the Monroe now, but this is a drawing of it in rendering phase. And then there were industrial uses. This is a sheet metal and automobile body warehouse on U Street, I think between U and V, that's currently adjacent to a new infill project, and it was converted to offices. And these are within the neighborhoods. And one of the reasons why we wanted to call attention to this is very often it's assumed that if there are commercial or industrial buildings in a neighborhood, that they are an intrusion, that they're an exception. And we wanted to point out, no, these were part of the neighborhood. This is where the people in the neighborhood worked. And so they really should be considered contributors to the same district in a mixed-use district. Another major factor in this building is its mid-century life. And it became a neighborhood of exodus for principally Chinese American and Japanese American populations who were being forced out of the West End by redevelopment. And a lot of the business people who had the means to do so, such as Harold Oye here, opened new business. Oye's pharmacy, the Oye family had a pharmacy business in Japantown along L Street before internment. After internment, they returned to L Street in a different building, and then redevelopment wiped out the neighborhood. So they built a new building, and that alignment along 10th Street between V and W had a lot of Japanese-owned businesses that really are now old enough to be historic buildings in their own right. And while the consultant said there isn't necessarily enough there for a separate district of just those businesses, in context of the neighborhood and the really important issue of people moving to this neighborhood in the 50s and 60s, it's a major theme that we found, and often they would use the same buildings. This building here is there's a Buddhist temple, and it was originally in the 1920s. It was an Italian apostolic church, and it became a Buddhist temple during this mid-century period. So both mid-century architecture, mid-century modern architecture and design, and also just the movement of people and the legacy of redevelopment that caused a major neighborhood change. And so this is, rather than being an exception to the rule, this is part of the significance of the neighborhood. And I mentioned mid-century architecture. Like I said, there's 19th century, early 20th century, and mid-century buildings. And so the historic context will be quite broad in order to capture these sorts of buildings and these sorts of stories throughout the district. And then one of the things we contemplated, we ended up scrapping the idea, but we're going to have to look at it again, is that the southern boundary of the neighborhood is defined currently by the WX freeway, by Highway 50. And so there's a hard stop at W Street. There are also resources on the south side of X Street that have survived, both institutional and residential and commercial. So the Buddhist church, or a lot of the, say, craftsman bungalows along X Street, very similar to the ones on the other side of W Street. But we felt like it created a physical boundary, and one of the things we're going to have to look at in the near future, because we now have some historic context for the neighborhood, is what to do about the buildings along X Street. But we decided to not include them in that boundary. And we have just received the context statement. The board and our project review subcommittee are going to review them in the next couple of weeks and pass along our recommendations to the consultant. She's preparing a series of individual nomination forms as well as the survey forms, and the plan is to have it submitted to the city by the end of this year or at the latest early 2022, and with the objective of having it listed. So part of that will be involve having more public meetings with Richmond Grove residents and talking with the city about how this would be listed and their feedback, and then a series of meetings with the preservation director, preservation commission, and city council in order to actually have it move forward as a historic district. So if there are any questions about that, and if not, okay, there's one person who asked in the Q&A. I will hand it over to John Marshak of Boulevard Park Neighborhood Association. And John has a lot of experience with historic preservation. He's a emeritus and the former chair of the Preservation Commission. So I just asked him just to fill us in on what's happening in Boulevard Park these days. So John, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Bill. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. The screen's showing up as it should?
Yep.
Great. So there's a project that has been occupying a lot of our attention in Boulevard Park since last April, and that is, it's called the 20th Place Project, and it's been a little difficult for us. So I thought I'd explain what we've been through on that and where it's going. So to give you an idea of, let me expand this to presentation view. There we go, a little larger. Show you where the project site is. As you may know, our neighborhood includes two historic districts, Boulevard Park and New Washington School. And there's a narrow strip along the railroad right-of-way that is zoned commercial and industrial. And that is where this project is proposed to take place. The lot south of Eggplant Alley would become an apartment building, and the warehouse building that's currently north of the alley would be converted into indoor parking and storage for tenants. So the zoning of the project south of Eggplant Alley is general commercial C2. North of Eggplant Alley, where the parking garage will be, is heavy industrial C4. Across 20th Street from the project in the Boulevard Park Historic District are all single and two-family residences, R1B zoning. And then general plan specifications, the project south of Eggplant Alley is urban corridor low with a floor area ratio of 0.3 to 3. That's where the apartment building will go. And then north of Eggplant Alley, where the parking garage conversion from the warehouse building will be, is employment center low rise with a floor area ratio up to 1.0. Across 20th Street from the project, traditional neighborhood medium density residential. So here's where, here's the northwest corner of 20th and F Streets. And what's currently on that lot is a 2-story office building and parking. And here is what's proposed. 5 stories, apartment building, 50 units. And then, as I mentioned, the existing warehouse building just north of this would be converted for parking. So across 20th Street, east of the project, we have residential. Many of these are designated as contributors to the Historic District of Boulevard Park. Some more contributors there across 20th Street. This is just east of the project site. And then kitty corner across both 20th and F Streets, southeast of the project, are more, in this case, 2-story contributing historic properties, residential. And then just south of the project across F Street, it's zoned commercial, but there's an existing 2-story apartment building that is there. So the neighborhood objections to the project include a number of things, and I'm showing you the city's responses on each of those. The neighborhood believes that the project context is broader than the narrow commercial and industrial strip along the railroad tracks because it will have a significant impact further into the neighborhoods on either side. It would create a wall between the 2 historic districts, separating 2 parts of our neighborhood. The city's response is that the parcels that are to be built on are outside of the historic districts, and so historic district plans do not apply. And per the Housing Accountability Act, only objective standards can be applied to the project. The height of the apartment building has been raised as an issue compared with the surrounding 1- and 2-story residences. And the city's response, the height is allowed per C2 zoning of the parcels, and no step down is needed because the street width is 80 feet, and that's the distance within which, if there are residential lots, you'd need a step down. So it's just outside of the step down need for the residential units across 20th Street. The maximum floor area ratio is 3.0, which would in this case wind up to be about a 4-story apartment building. They're doing 5 stories instead. And the city indicated that they're allowed to exceed the maximum floor area ratio because they're providing, quote, significant community benefit, which is a concept that has never been defined and is arbitrarily being determined by the city planning staff. So no deviations are needed. Oops. Because there are no deviations needed, the level of review is staff level on this project. No hearings. So these are the concepts that the developer has put forward as significant community benefit. There'd be in the lobby area a summertime kids coding camp program that would last at least 5 years. There'd be 25 excess bicycle storage spaces above what's required. Rooftop solar photovoltaic panels will be included in the project, as well as all electric appliances in the apartments. There'll be a rooftop garden for the residents, and public art along the railroad side of the apartment building and the parking garage. The neighborhood feels that these are merely marketing to future project tenants rather than amenities that would enhance the neighborhood itself. And it does not account for the substantial community harm that this 5-story, 50-unit apartment building will have right in the middle of our neighborhood. So the project was approved at staff level, meeting all objective requirements. Our only recourse was to challenge the decision using a request for reconsideration at the director level. And the Boulevard Park Neighborhood Association, as well as one of the property owners that had commented earlier, actually filed for reconsideration. That's about a $300 cost to each of us. And the urban design manager ruled denying the appeal. His decision is final and no other appeals are allowed. And that's the summary of the project.
Okay, thank you, John. We did have one question. Who is do you know who is the developer of the project?
Cassadine Properties.
Okay. And I wanted to mention, because someone asked, that these presentations in general, they're by the presenter. So this is BPNA's position. Preservation Sacramento didn't take a position on this project because it doesn't involve a historic property. The only feedback, just like, for example, the project that we presented, or that was presented earlier, Growers District, we haven't taken a position on that project either. And the only feedback I have on this project is personal, in that we sent an email. We got an email from the developer about this project at Preservation Sacramento, and I reached out to them. I said, "Hey, could you tell us more about this project?" And because the earlier email had just said, "Look at our website," and said, "Hey, we'd like to know more. Can you tell us anything else about this?" And their response was, "Look at the website." So
that was the answer that most of the commenters from the neighborhood got from the developer, was look at the website.
Yeah, and the website was fairly minimal. It didn't have a whole lot of information. So, and it's my understanding that part of why this may have gotten a closer look is because the city felt they hadn't done the level of outreach that was expected of them. And so that in a lot of cases, problems, I think the communication between a development group or a builder and the neighborhood, that
actually
like it didn't happen here.
In very early on in the project project proposal, the developer did meet with the neighborhood association via Zoom. Our neighborhood association meetings have been Zoom meetings on a monthly basis with the board of directors. And they did make a presentation. There was some discussion. And it was very clear the developer had no intention of making any sort of concessions or changes to the project as a result of input received during that meeting, or any of the comment letters that were sent either into the website or to the city directly.
Okay, well, thank you, John. Thanks for sharing what's happening there.
One additional thing I'd like to bring up as a concept that we might apply to other projects, this idea of significant community benefit to allow the floor area ratio to be exceeded is actually not an objective standard. And the city was saying that only objective standards apply. Well, it's very subjective to say what a significant community benefit is. Maybe we could make a position to the city that is not an applicable objective design standard, and therefore no exceedances of floor area ratio should be allowed.
Yeah, as I'm sure you know, there were other projects where that concept was introduced, and the city's official position is that significant community benefit is whatever we say it is.
Yeah, right.
And so that's the challenge going forward, is essentially having the city being willing to put some kind of limits on there. And there was some talk about it until a certain court decision came through. So
Right.
thank you, John. And we'll move on to our next speaker. Let me just make sure that in the chat. Okay. I don't know if we know what town the developer's from, but the affordability level, which someone asked about, is all market rate.
Yeah, it's all market rate, and the developer is local.
All right. We'll pass the conch to Karen Jacques, who is going to talk about the Capitol Annex project. And Karen, let me just take a moment to bring up your presentation.
Okay. And I'm going to do some brief history before I will need those slides.
All right, well, go ahead.
So I am Karen Jacques, and I'm speaking both as Preservation Sacramento's liaison to PAC, which is Public Accountability for Our Capital, which is an ad hoc group that has come together in response to what we think is a disaster that's planned for the state capitol. And then I'm also an active member of PAC. And I think by this time, most people are aware that there is a project at the Capitol that would tear down the historic annex and build a much larger annex, and that there's a great deal of opposition to it because it's an assault on what is really Sacramento's crown jewel of historic sites. Our Capitol, which is a National Register site, which includes both the original 1870s Capitol, and then the Capitol Annex, which was completed in 1952, and then the surrounding Capitol Park. And just to give you some very brief history before we get to slides of the most current view of what they're planning to do. The Joint Rules Committee of the legislature has oversight over the facilities at the Capitol. There's long been recognition that there were some issues that needed to be addressed with the historic annex building. It's out of date in terms of some of the modern systems and wiring things that you need to deal with today's technology as opposed to 1950s technology when people had typewriters. There's also deferred maintenance. So when this whole thing began, everybody sort of agreed that something did need to be done to address the problems with the annex. As a result of that, in 2016, there was initial legislation that said that joint rules could address it by either deciding to rehabilitate the historic annex or to tear it down. And there was follow-up legislation in 2018, which said joint rules can do that. And it also has our authorization to build a large new underground parking lot and to build a large new underground visitor center. And while we're at it, to build a new building, now known as the Swing Building at 10th and O, to which the legislature and government offices and hearing rooms could move while all of this is done. One would have thought, given that the annex is on the National Register, that there would at least have been, as part of the process, a thorough review of what it would take to rehabilitate that building in a way that could meet the needs of the legislature. But a decision was made before any of the EIR work was done that it would be demolished. There would be no review of even how rehabilitation might be addressed. And I'm not sure how. It's been a very opaque process. And I think that the bulk of residents of Sacramento, certainly residents of the state, taxpayers of the state, and probably a lot of legislators are really unaware of most of what is happening here. But anyway, in 2019, the first draft EIR was done. Again, without any, it just said it's not possible to rehab the existing annex with no backup data, and a review of what they were proposing to do at the time, which was quite vague. Then in 2020, they put out a recirculated draft DEIR saying we're doing this because we've now redesigned the Vista Center. It wasn't clear in the first DEIR what the Vista Center would have looked like. It wasn't clear in the our DEIR what the new one would look like, but they put it out. And then in 2021, they did a final EIR, which the Department of General Services has certified. Never mind that there were major changes between the recirculated draft EIR and the final EIR that included picking up the 200-car underground parking lot and moving it from the south of the Capitol to the east of the Capitol. The other thing, one of the other things that we've learned in terms of the lack of transparency is the decisions on all of this don't even need to be made by the full Joint Rules Committee, which at least has hearings and had a couple of hearings where there were no votes taken because they didn't have a quorum, but that the actual decision-making on the process was defined through a memorandum of understanding with the legislature and DGS, or with Joint Rules and DGS, that says that the chair of Joint Rules, who is Assembly Member Cooley, the vice chair, who is Senator Hartsburg, and a designated representative of the governor's office will make all of the decisions about this. So what I want to do now is bring you up to date on what we are currently looking at and what we're doing about it. So Bill, if you could bring up the first slide. Okay. This is the best overall view, and it's a side view looking north of the new building that will replace the existing annex. It's tied together by a glass connector that does let you see more of the rear of the original Capitol building, but we had limited pictures, but this building shows what the whole thing will be. It is all completely glass. When you look at it on a diagram, it is wider than the original 1870s Capitol. And it is much, much larger. It extends east all the way to the 12th Street walkway that runs between L and N. So it eats up a huge part of the park. The materials that are used have nothing to do, they don't relate to the original 1870s Capitol. The design doesn't relate to it in any meaningful way. We were told, one of the things we were told that made it necessary to build a new building was to have much, much more space for legislative hearing rooms and offices. But this gigantic annex has a gigantic multi-story atrium down the middle of it that takes up a large portion of that space and really isn't needed for anything except, I guess, for the legislature to feel that they are going to be meeting in a very expensive new palace. One of the other things to note about it is that in the original guidelines that were put together, if any new building were to be built, was that it would not be wider than the 1870s historic Capitol. But this building is wider, but never mind the guidelines. Next slide, please. Let's see, okay. as I said, in 2018, one of the things that was added to the Annex project was a brand new Vista Center. And this Vista Center involves wiping out the historic West Plaza, which the final EIR actually said had been very little change since the, other than trees growing, since the original 1870s Capitol was built. So instead of the West Plaza, you get this giant cement walkway leading to the basement level of the original historic Capitol. You get what was the ground level turned into this thing that looks like a balcony. You lose the wide front steps that were the first level leading up to the Capitol. And there is a drastic change, as you can see, to the front, which was the primary facade of our original historic Capitol building. And this is likely a sufficient change to bring up a question of whether it would be able to remain on the National Register. As part of this broad cement, gigantic walkway in the Disneyland entrance, you'll lose at least two of the historic deodars that were put in when the original Capitol was built, and probably four of them, according to one of the members of PAC. And I just want to add at this point about PAC that two of its founding members were two members of the State Historic Capitol Commission, which was supposed to have oversight of the historic Capitol, but which was never consulted about any of these plans. And when it asked for the plans, was denied the plans until things finally became public with the draft EIRs and now these drawings. So those two, both the chair of the PAC, who's now chair of the PAC, but the chair of the Historic Capitol Commission, Dick Cowan, resigned in protest, as did Paula Pepper, who's a nationally owned arborist who's talked about the fate of the deodars. So next slide, please. This is an overview of the footprint of what is now planned to be built. So you can see that the cement stuff and the changed footprint runs from the 10th Street sidewalk all the way up to the front facade of the historic Capitol. The X's are the trees. This is, and the trees are Paula's last rendition of what she thinks would happen. So the trees that would be lost, and then additional trees that are potentially at risk. In behind the historic Capitol, you can see the footprint of the original Capitol, and then the expanded footprint going all the way to the 12th Street walkway of the new Capitol. And you can see the wider outline. I'm sorry, I misspoke. The black line is shows the edges of the Capitol, and then the dotted line is taking it out further. And then you can also see the outline of the parking garage and the driveways, which are going to be off of L and N. So in addition to the trees that will be lost in this giant footprint of the park, we'll also be losing 49 of the historic palms that are in the walkway. So it's a huge chunk of the park that's gone, plus as I said, the loss to the park and the complete end of the plaza in the front. I wear two hats here representing PAC. I'm talking about the historic implications of what we're going to lose. I'm also a climate activist. And so this is also a sustainability disaster. We're tearing down a very large building made out of cement, which was incredibly energy intensive to manufacture. We're losing all of those materials. We're losing all of the embodied energy that you retain when you adaptively reuse a historic building. And we're gaining a giant cement walkway in the front, as well as all the materials that it takes to build a giant new glass building that will replace the Annex. And we're also adding this large new parking lot. It replaces the parking lot that's currently under the existing Annex building. And we're losing it at a time when California and the legislator is telling people that, oh, we need to be getting out of our cars. We need to be moving to other forms of transit. You don't need the parking that you thought you needed, but we need this giant new parking garage. So it's a matter of lack of sustainability and a do as we say, not as we do. A lot of people look at this and it's far down the line and they're starting to put up the fencing that will allow them to, they hope, to begin construction in 2022. So people are saying, oh, this is a lost cause, blah, blah, blah. This is not a lost cause. 2 CEQA lawsuits have been filed. They are very strong cases because there has been so much that CEQA has not accounted for, so much that showed up without any chance to comment on it in the final EIR that wasn't included in the draft or the recirculated draft. And we have attorneys working on it. We have attorneys also working on getting an injunction so that demolition can't go forward until this is adjudicated. For people who may have seen the paper about a ruling against a case on the Annex that was filed, that was a case that was filed before the final EIR had been certified. It dealt only with the decision that was made to demolish the Annex before any environmental review had been done. And that decision is being appealed. That case was lost on the grounds that nobody filed in time, but none of the information was public. Nobody knew to file until we finally got hold of the information by making multiple requests to DGS and joint rules. So where we stand now, and let's look at the last slide, the final slide. Where we stand now is that there's a large number of organizations that are working on this in one way or another. Preservation Sacramento, obviously by getting out the word and by having made a contribution toward the lawsuit and by supporting the actions of PAC. A number of other organizations, California Preservation Foundation is one of our coalition partners. The California Capital Historic Preservation Society is another of those organizations that was founded. It's a C3 tax deductible. Well, it's actually technically a foundation that's tax deductible specifically to protect the historic capital, and it has taken on the role of being the organization that collects the donations for us. So in bringing you up to date, part of what I'm wanting to ask you is anyone who is able to donate to help with the lawsuits, and you can donate either by mailing a check to the California Capitol Historic Preservation Society, or by going online to CAP's website, or I'm sorry, to PAC's website, too many initials. And that is savecalcap.org. And so that link is up here. And our website has a link to the Capitol Historic Society's donation site. And we think we have a reasonable chance of winning this fight. We want to, if we win, we want to get them to go back to the drawing boards to come up with a project that would rehab the historic annex, to not do the parking garage. They have a huge brand new parking garage beneath the swing building that they just built that could easily be used by legislators. If they felt that they couldn't cross a street, they could connect it. There are tunnels that currently run under the park. They could connect it to one of those tunnels. For all we know, it's already connected. We think that the Vista Center either should not be built or completely changed in its approach, because it is absolutely unacceptable to destroy the front, the most prominent facade of our original Capitol, and to destroy the whole view that you get as you walk east down Capitol Mall toward the Capitol and past the fountain that Preservation Sacramento was involved in the fight to save. So that's what we're hoping. We're fighting as hard as we can. We are very close to our donation goals, but we still need some help to get over that finish line. And our attorneys are working very hard, and for all of us, and I think really for the sake of the city of Sacramento, for which the park is a huge amenity and people love visiting the Capitol, and for the tourists who come from all over the state and all over the world, and for the historic integrity of what could arguably be considered the most important historic site in California. We need to win this battle.
Okay, thank you, Karen. And just as a little happy note at the end, speaking of totally unwinnable fights that we shouldn't have bothered ever going into, this is the state capitol fountain. It's an old photo of it. Wanted to update people and let people know that the authorization for $2 million to restore the capitol fountain is included in the upcoming rehab of the UNRWA building, including restoration following the Secretary of the Interior's standards. So that's you could never win or possibly hope to have a positive outcome. Well, we have a recent example of exactly that happening.
And that's why having gotten that it's so important to preserve the integrity of what it leads to, that grand view down that walkway, and seeing the fountain, and then the front of the Capitol with its plaza that is so historic in and of its own right.
Okay. And I just told the photo didn't come through, but here it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can, looking at that, you can remember what I showed you in those slides, where that whole lower area has become this Disneyland looking entrance to this underground Vista Center.
Okay, we have a couple of questions, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the share for now. And it looks like the questions have come in via Q&A. Do you know if any of the existing memorials will need to be removed or moved?
They say that they will preserve and move the memorials. One of the things that's been frustrating is that there's never been a landscape plan for this park after this project is completed. They say that they'll move and save some of the trees. There's never been a plan for that. So we don't know where they would go. We don't think, and Paula doesn't think that that the huge trees could be moved. We don't think that the palm trees could likely survive, that are in the parkway could likely survive either. But part of what was missing from the original draft DIR and from the recirculated one was any concrete plan for the park that showed that that full footprint and how the rest of the park would be then reorganized.
Thank you. So we are running a little short on time, so I want to move on to our final item. And I noticed that Don Cox has joined he's one of our presenters, and he did a lot of the principal photography and research and documentation for our recently completed Preservation Sacramento virtual historic home tour. And going to show a video, just a 5-minute clip of one of the videos that was shown. Karen, you can go ahead and turn off your camera. And Don, before we show the video, did you want to say anything about the video or about what's coming up?
Actually, no.
Okay.
Other than that, it wore me out.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'll let the video speak for itself.
Yeah, there we go.
It does a very eloquent job. So
thank you.
Stand by, and we'll begin the video in just a moment.
As we researched the Azevedo Fargo house, we recently ran across additional historic materials that made us realize there is a much richer story to be told. So, rather than rush to get it done, we decided to give you an overview history and brief tour now. Sometime after the start of next year, when we have had time to absorb and interpret all of the material, we will produce a longer video that tells a larger story. But even in an abbreviated version, the story about the house and its occupants is still very interesting. Joseph Azevedo Sr. was born in Portugal in 1863 and emigrated He and his wife Amy occupied the house through the 1990s. They sold the property to Heather Fargo and her husband, Alan Mole, in 2000.
And to let everybody know, we announced during the home tour that, and we're announcing now, we'll send out an email to follow up. We're going to have an expanded members only video. So it'll be a video tour like the one we did earlier this year and the one we just concluded. And everybody who's a current member of Preservation Sacramento and everybody who bought a ticket for the home tour will be invited to attend. So just wanted to give you a sneak peek of what is coming in the coming year. We have a lot to talk about for 2022, and the board is going to discuss our future as an organization. If you're a member, you'll be getting an announcement about our board elections that happen every other year pretty soon. If you're not a member, I really encourage you to join. You can find more details at preservationsacramento.org. We're a member-supported, membership-based organization, all volunteer, and the home tour is our principal fundraiser, but we obviously, our membership is what allows our projects to happen. So thank you all very much for joining us today. And the next meeting will be, like I said, in February and that'll be our first meeting for 2022.
No, one quick last announcement.
Yes,
there's a demonstration rally to save the Capitol on Wednesday the 17th at 11 on the west steps of the Capitol.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I forgot to put that.
All right, thank you. So the 17th of November at 11 o'clock on the west steps of the Capitol. Okay, we're going to spread that via social media as well. So we want to pass the word about that. So thanks everyone for being part of the November 2021 Preservation Roundtable, and have a good day.